Kaleva curled up in her bed one musty November afternoon. Her room was a testament to all sorts of hobbies and talents, all abandoned but kept for the memory. Each had been given no longer than 3 months, enough time to learn, practice, and grow sick of it. The tuba in the corner had been only a few weeks, but with nobody to play it with, the low notes became tiring. 2 more instruments in the corner, a clarinet and a finger piano, had suffered the same fate. The walls were carpeted in all sorts of paintings and murals, with drawers stuffed full of glue, papers, and notebooks. Shelves full of trophies filled in the empty spaces, every school sport and team that now hated her because she quit mid-semester. Even her person was a mess of the things she'd done. She had a habit of wearing every piece of jewelry she'd ever made, and purple hair in the prettiest curls rolled down her back from a hairdressing obsession. 2 minutes into her nap she heard a familiar pattern of footsteps outside her window. Even without a week of spy training, Kaleva recognized the nervous tiptoeing of her classmate, Markwell. She burst out her window like a firework and leaned so far out that her feet came off the floor. "Mark," she yelled. He dropped the groceries he'd been carrying and screamed. "Why do you always sneak up on me?" he called up to the 3rd floor. "Because it makes talking to you at least a little bit interesting," Kaleva said, hopping onto the windowsill. "Don't you dare jump from there." Markwell squeaked. "I'm not jumping," Kaleva said, "I'm just climbing down the oak. No need to panic." She swung another leg over the sill and jumped the small distance to the first strong branch. A crowd of spectators had gathered on the street, watching without the knowledge that she wasn't a performer. With a final swing she reached the bottom branch and hopped down to applause, grabbing Markwell's groceries and walking casually down the sidewalk. He hurried after her, his brow furrowed. "Come on, that was impressive," Kaleva said, dropping the bags off on Markwell's stoop. "That was dangerous," he said, ringing the doorbell. "Let's go." "So what adventure were you thinking of today?" she asked, skipping after him. "Because I had the best one ever." "Fine, what is it?" "We'll rent a boat from the lake," Kaleva said. "I have money saved up, and then we can carry it over our heads to the worst part of the river and go rafting." "Are you crazy?" Markwell asked. "There's no way I'm ever doing that." "Well, you are." "Today," she said. "I know it's cold, but it's not going to get any warmer until April. The fronts are moving in from Canada all winter." "That doesn't make any sense," Markwell said, but Kaleva had already begun running to the docks at the lake. By the time he caught up to her, she'd already negotiated with the booth and had the canoe flipped upside down over her head. "Carry the oars, will you?" "I'm getting a life preserver," he said, "and a vest." They straggled across the bustling town with their equipment, getting strange looks from everyone they knew. Markwell hid his face as best he could, while Kaleva kept her head up in the sun, her hair thrown back and not even slightly rustled from the heavy weight over her back. Finally the closest sign of water came into view, across a stretch of forest with thick shrubbery. "That should do it," Kaleva said, flipping the canoe back over. "I'm covered in mosquito bites." Markwell complained. "I think this is a good spot, don't you?" "Definitely not," he said, tying on his vest while looking out at the running rapids with rocks at the bottom. "Why don't we just go back to the lake?" "We already made it all the way here," she insisted. "Climb in." She jumped into the front, facing out to the rapids in an unconventional seating, with her knees on the very edge of the canoe. "Come on, before it tips." Markwell shuffled forward and stepped onto the back, sitting cross-legged with his life preserver making it impossible to move any further. "Here we go," Kaleva exclaimed, pushing off of a nearby tree with the oar and sending them cascading down the rapids. The sparkling water took them in, shoving their boat violently downstream. It was a serene ride for the first part, geese flying in the sky and ducks bathing in the shallower pools, but then the river sent a stronger current at the sailors and the canoe nearly tipped over. Markwell held onto the edge with white knuckles, too scared to even scream. "Well, this is thrilling," Kaleva said, smiling as she stuck her oar out to keep their boat from smashing against a rock. "Just keep your hands inside, or they'll get crushed." With another near tip, their canoe hit a shallow part of the river and Markwell fell forward and crashed into Kaleva, knocking the oars out of her hands. I'm sorry, he said, but the oars were already too far away to reach, and the current had pushed them into a decline almost as steep as a waterfall. They fell into the bottom pool, luckily deep enough of a cushion that the canoe didn't break. It flipped and dumped them into the freezing water. Markwell grabbed onto the boat, his life preserver having fallen off some time before. Kaleva pulled him and the canoe back to shore with one arm, breathing in a way that kept hypothermia at bay. She took her wet coat off and handed it to Markwell, leaving him behind as she placed the boat and washed up oars back onto her person and started up the river. He watched her speechlessly in amazement, hurrying after her up the tall rocks. "Why aren't you saying anything?" he asked nervously. "I know you're mad and I'd rather save my breath for the hike," she said, avoiding his gaze. "I'm sorry for losing the oars," he said. "It wasn't your fault," she sighed, "I just think there's nothing left for me to do. I've tried everything, but the second it gets too difficult or repetitive I give up. I have nothing but respect for your cello playing and the way you can just sit quietly in your room for hours. It doesn't take much to start hobbies, but then I just leave them when it seems like I could fail. Nobody fails learning, but if I stick to anything for long enough I'll be good enough to be judged. Even this didn't work, and now I might never have any adventure again." "Don't be dramatic," Markwell said through chattering teeth. "We'll go swimming in the pool tomorrow, and I can give you cello lessons." Kaleva gave him a small sad smile, and trudged the rest of the way in silence. "You should go home," she said, "it's cold and I can return this by myself." "Okay," he said, "bye." He watched her walk down to the docks from the kitchen window, distraught from the upset his friend was in. The morning was foggy, and when Markwell came to Kaleva's window she didn't jump out to greet him, or even respond to the doorbell. "Is she here?" he asked her grandmother. "I'm sure," she said, "she hasn't left her room since she came home yesterday." "That's bad," he mumbled. "Go on up, I'm sure she won't mind," her grandmother said with a warm smile. It took a few minutes for Markwell to get the courage to knock on the door, and he only got an answer after he tripped while tapping his foot. "Come in." He opened the door, the doorknob clattering in his shaking hand. The room was still and silent, only an island of purple hair in the pink and blue blankets. "What's wrong?" Markwell asked, his previous speech too long for the delicate situation. "I'm tired of life," Kaleva said. "I hate myself for dragging you around with me on all those trips and dangerous events." "No regrets," Markwell said. "I'm still alive and have most of my toes." Kaleva kept her head turned away, but dug into the space between the mattress and the bed frame, pulling out a letter. "My parents are still in Turkey," she said, handing it to him. "Did they say when they're getting back?" he asked. "They'll probably bring you back something." "They're not coming back," Kaleva said. "They've moved to Turkey with my baby sister. And left me here. Now I have to keep myself busy forever." "What's the point?" "There isn't one," Markwell said, "but I have this." He shuffled out the door and came in with a bag full of props. "What is that?" Kaleva asked. "Costumes," Markwell said, regretting his own idea. "I thought we could dress up so nobody would recognize us and sneak behind the stage of the theater for the puppet show. We could watch it backstage maybe, if you want." Without a word Kaleva climbed out of bed and slipped her boots on over her pajamas. She hugged Markwell so tight that he let out a squeak, let go and began shuffling through the bag of costumes, pulling out a fedora and a yellow feathered scarf. "I can't think of anything interesting to do tomorrow," she said pensively. "I'll handle the activities for the next month, and then you can do it in December." "That sounds fine," Kaleva said quietly, smiling the truest smile he'd ever seen on her.